So I just got a message from YouTube that it is my 3-year anniversary on YouTube, and that really surprised me because I wasn't really keeping track, and I haven't been posting for 3 years, but we posted our first video 3 years ago, and that is when Jesse and I took a backpacking trip on the Appalachian Trail. We lasted 2 whole weeks before Jesse was injured beyond repair, and we needed to get off the trail. We didn't really have a goal, and I mean, our goal was to just go as far as we could. And we hiked the entire Georgia section of the trail, which is from from Amicalola Falls up, and then there's a entrance trail that's about 8 miles, and we did that as well. So yeah, it's just really cool to think about that, and I pulled up some of the old videos, and Jesse's little voice, he sounded so little.
How's your AT experience so far, Jess?
Very great. I'm sorry, I'm hungry for burgers.
That was such a cool trip. It was really challenging, and it's the kind of thing that changes you as a human when you do something like that. So we left in March, and from Springer Mountain, and started heading north on the Appalachian Trail, and it was challenging. It was so difficult. I mean, aside from the inclines and declines and the mountain hiking, the weather. So we were a couple days in, and we got hit with a freak snowstorm, and the temperatures plummeted very fast, and we got into a dangerous situation where we were caught in a ravine, and it started raining, and I knew that the temperatures were about to plummet it was going from like the 40s to like the single digits overnight. And I'm like, oh my God, if we get wet, we're gonna freeze. And we had to like pack up our campsite. There's no one around us. It was like the evening, the sun was going down. We had to pack up and go to higher ground and try to get to the next shelter site where there would be people and safety. By the time we got on the trail, it was dark, and I'm trying not to panic. I mean, this is scary. We're miles into the Appalachian Mountains. So we're heading down the trail. It's in the dark. We have our headlamps on. We're only about a mile from this campsite where I know there's going to be other people, and it's going to be on higher ground. So we're heading down this trail, and I start heading into the mountains, and Jesse said, Mom, the trail's this way. I'm like, no, Jesse, the trail's this way. And I keep going, and he's like, Mom, the trail's this way. And he was right. I almost led us into the mountains in the middle of the night with freezing temperatures, rain. Now, I did have my phone for navigation, but I was struggling with service at this point. And we had ordered GPS devices to keep us safe on these trails, and they never showed up. And we decided to just start the trail without them. That was a huge mistake. Those things will keep you alive. We certainly would have been much safer with them. So we got to the campsite. There was a lot of people there, fortunately. There was a shelter, but it was full, and we expected it to be because it was freezing out, and that's okay, but at least we were at higher ground, and there were people around, so if there was an emergency, there would be help. And there was also a fire. So we set up camp there. The rain was just getting started. So we got in our tents, and when I woke up, my tent was encrusted in ice.
Right now my tent is covered in snow. Fortunately, we've both been able to stay warm inside our sleeping bags, and we are going to a hostel tonight.
I mean, we were frozen, and I opened my tent, and there was like a layer of snow around me. I was poking the top of my tent, and there was ice falling off. It was cold, and I had a hard time getting up, but at some point I had to because I needed to start moving around. Jesse was doing okay. He has a naturally warmer body temperature, and I also got him better gear than I got myself, which is also stupid. I got him all the best gear, and I got myself some budget stuff and some good stuff, and I wouldn't recommend doing that either. The budget stuff is just nothing that I got that was a budget anything was was adequate for the Appalachian Trail. So we walked around during the day. We tried to stay warm. It was windy, it was cold, but I managed to get in touch with a cab driver that was going to pick us up off the mountain and take us to a hostel. And I was so lucky to find a hostel that had an opening. It was pretty far off the trail, but we were desperate at this point. I was. Jesse seemed fine. So he couldn't pick us up until 4 p.m. We packed up around 1 or 2 or whatever it was, and we started heading off the trail. We still had another, I don't know, maybe 2 miles before we got to the road. And so we started hiking, and it was icy, and so we were going pretty slow, but once we got around the mountain, I could see the road, and I could see our cab driver. I got so excited. I started running, and I slipped and fell. And hurt my wrist, but I was fine. And we got off the mountain. And that night was another really tough night. And there's a lady that I knew that stayed on the mountain that night at that campsite. And she said she didn't think she was going to survive. She actually texted her sister and let her know that she might not make it because it was that cold. And someone else was airlifted off of the campsite that night. It was so cold. It was windy, single digits. So yeah, that was one night, 2 nights on the Appalachian Trail. And then we ended up in a hostel that night, which I never thought I would stay in a hostel with my young son. So this was my first hostel experience. So here we are in this room there's 4 beds. So Jesse and I are on our top bunks, and the bottom bunks below us are 2 strangers. The lady below me was an attorney who was also hiking the Appalachian Trail. And the guy below Jesse was a homeless guy who lived in his car and just drove around the trail and lived on the trail and then occasionally stayed in hostels. He was an ex-military guy, and, all my mother senses were like, this isn't right. But he was a very nice guy. They were both very nice. We were very safe the entire time, but it was an odd experience that I never thought I would be in. And then we stayed there that night through the day, and then I think we stayed one more night. And then the temperatures picked back up when we got back on the trail. And Jesse had left his jacket back at the hostel, which was super important. I was really scared. We called the cab driver. He went and got it for us and brought it to us on the trail. Didn't charge us anything, but I gave him a good tip for it. And I just so grateful that we were able to get it back. We got back on the trail, and within a couple of days, we had this downpour. It rained all day, and the temperatures were just up and down. Like you'd be hiking, you'd get really hot, and then all of a sudden you'd turn the corner around a mountain, and the wind would hit you, and you'd just be cold. And so there's these extremes of temperatures. And then there's one day that it just poured all day, with no reprieve, and we're hiking through the rain. We finally get to our campsite. We're soaked. We set up camp. Jesse was little, so I left him he wasn't little. I stuck him under the shelter while I set up his tent, and I ran him over into his tent, and then I set up my tent. I'm soaking wet. I get in there, but because fortunately I got enough covers for our bags that I had some dry clothes to put on. Someone gave me the idea of using these compactor bags to line your backpack to keep your stuff dry, and thank God we did that. So it was so nice to have some dry clothes to put on. You're just kind of like, shifting around, trying to get dressed and try to pack up, trying to clean up, trying to, eat and everything. And I had some cheap rain gear that had basically disintegrated. Frog dogs. In the rain. Jesse had some better gear, so he was okay. But when we made it to the next town, I bought some better rain gear. But of course, since it was this little Appalachian Trail hiking store, they could charge whatever they wanted because they knew you were desperate, and I was. So I paid premium price for my rain gear. And then we got back on the trail, and then we kept on hiking. We made it to Hiawassee, Georgia. Beautiful town. And when I first saw it, actually, now that I think about it, it kind of reminds me of Poker Nuts. I was like, I want to live here. It's so beautiful. You got mountains, you got the lakes. It's so beautiful. But after a day there, I ended up realizing that all the water and all the food there had a smell to it. There was something in that water, and I ended up pretty sick. And then as we're resting there, the last day before we got there, Jesse was limping, but we had to push through it, which is not something you should do. If you have an injury, you should stop and rest, but we were in the mountains, so we pushed through it. We got to our hotel, and he had some very noticeable inflammation on his knees, so we ended up getting picked up off the trail and taken home, and he went to a physical therapist, and they were able to confirm that he needed, he had little tears in the, whatever the tendons are or whatever in his knees, and he needed to rehab. It took him about 9 months to rehab, so he was growing very fast. You know, he and I are both kind of prone to injuries. No matter how much conditioning and stretching we do, we tend to have very tight muscles and that puts a lot of pressure on tendons, and I've always struggled with injuries, and so he was injured and started physical therapy for about 9 months, and it was fine after that. But yeah, what an adventure. The views were beautiful, the weather was extreme, the people were amazing. I met this older lady, she's probably in her 60s, and she was hiking the trail with the ashes of her son, and she wanted to do this trail with her son. She never did tell me what happened to him, but she was very emotional about it, and felt very attached, very connected with Jesse and I on the trail, and she and I learned how to hang a bear bag together. That's hard, that's pretty challenging, because on the Appalachian Trail there's so many black bears. If you're at a campsite in the Georgia area, they have bear boxes for you to put your food in at night. It seals and the bears can't smell it or get in. But if you're not at a campsite, you have to hang your food from a tree, and it can't be near the trunk because they'd be able to get it, and it can't be too close to the branch because they'd still be able to get it. If it's too close to the ground, you have to hang this thing so perfectly so the bears can't get it. And then they might still get it because they've figured out how to undo knots and everything. So we learned how to hang bear bags together. But that's it. Yeah, so it's been 3 years today since we posted our first video. I think we started, it was March 17th. So it was yesterday. So yesterday would have been our 3-year anniversary since starting the Appalachian Trail. So just wanted to share that with y'all.